first piece you need to know this week is Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. This is one of the most impressive, but also one of the most misunderstood pieces in the entire classical canon. But it also remains one of the most frequently played and exciting works ever written. Written back in 1880, this is actually an ode to the Russian defeat of Napoleon in 1812. And yet, strangely enough, in the last half century, it's become a regular part with the July 4th celebrations in the United States, leading many people to incorrectly believe it was written for the US War of 1812. However, the piece does have a close tie to the United States, as Tchaikovsky himself conducted this at the opening of Carnegie Hall in 1891. The work itself actually pulls heavily from traditional Russian melodies and folk music, and if you dig into the battle that's being celebrated, the pace and sound of the music follows it almost perfectly. But it's the main refrain and then the ending which is often punctuated by live cannon fire that most people know so well. But strangely enough, due to the way that cannons fire, most scholars believe that Tchaikovsky himself never actually got to experience it with the proper cannon timing during his lifetime, as the proper time for the cannons to be fired was actually not perfected until the late 1960s. Regardless, this work remains one of Tchaikovsky's best known pieces, one of the best across the globe, and it's one you absolutely have to know. Next up is Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor. Written in 1900 and 1901, this is one of his most famous pieces, and many will argue this is the piece that made him the legend he remains to this day. This piece is very significant because during the first few public performances, Rachmaninoff himself was the featured pianist, and it showed his unrivaled abilities not only as a composer, but also as a player. This second concerto took a number of years for him to write, and a lot of scholars point to the fact that his first symphony wasn't very well received, and the original score to this is actually dedicated to one of Rachmaninoff's physicians, who most believe helped him through a lot of the life issues and depression he was dealing with at that time. The work itself has this flow and this feel like nothing else, and it actually takes a very long time for the main theme to get introduced. But this piece is laden with a number of nods to his Russian roots, especially in the arpeggios. Whether it's the almost march-like progressions, the amazingly eerie horn parts, or the masterful piano work throughout it, this piece just can't be topped from any angle. There's also this swelling intensity that builds throughout the whole piece, and you can find elements of this concerto being used by everyone from Frank Sinatra to Eric Carmen to a number of films over the years. There's no question that the piano works of Rachmaninoff remain some of the most intimidating work for any pianist after more than a century, and this is absolutely one of his most impressive musical feats. The last piece I want to discuss this time is Rossini's William Tell Overture. Written in the late 1820s as the final of his 39 operas, this work actually is unique because it has 4 distinctive sections that don't take any pause, they just flow perfectly into one another. The overall composition was made to give the listener the image of the Swiss Alps, and it begins with a slower passage leading to a coming storm. This leads to where you have the presence of the entire orchestra, and it's a section of this piece that continues to delight audiences around the world. This second portion was the staple of so many Disney films in the early years of Walt Disney, and yet it's actually not the most famous part of the overture. After the storm passes in the piece, we find ourselves at a section that's commonly referred to as the March of the Swiss Soldiers. And this section remains one of the most widely performed pieces and widely used pieces in all of classical history. While it was used in Bugs Bunny cartoons, A Clockwork Orange, it's probably best known for being the theme song to the Lone Ranger TV and radio series. And the way that different parts of the William Tell Overture are mixed into popular culture is truly endless. This is just one of those pieces that the moment you hear it, you have to know what it is because it's probably Rossini's best known piece and an essential part of the history of music. Honestly, you just can't overstate the importance of classical music in all areas of culture over the past few hundred years. So make sure you take some time this week and get your classical on.